Hello and welcome to another lap guide for the iRacing Camel GT series. This week we're at Snetterton 300. Here's a lap first. Okay, so lap time there's a 132.850. This is in default late afternoon weather that I use for my testing, and just a couple of quick notes. There's also the optimal sectors for my testing in this weather. The weather we often see in late afternoon will go a little warmer than this, and if it does, a couple of things you can do with the setup to help with that would be to increase the wing a little bit. I'm running a 9 wing in the setup that I'm sharing here. You could actually bump that up to 10 if you needed to. You could also increase the rake of the car by raising the rear spring perch offset a bit. You could even reduce preload a little. If it's real warm and you're having trouble with traction, you could even reduce your tire pressures just a bit there. That might help a little bit with grip. So a couple things there for you to try if you want to see if you can adjust the setup to suit your needs. So let's go ahead and go back to the lap turn by turn here in more detail now. Let's go ahead and jump up to turn 1. All right, so approaching turn 1, I'm looking for the board here on the left, the final board, and turning in right at about that mark, or maybe just immediately after. My goal turning into Riches here is to get as close to the curbing here on the right without actually using too much of it. In this particular example, I actually used a little bit more curbing than I'd like to, and you'll notice as I kind of angle around the latter part here, I again use a little bit more curbing here, and I like to actually avoid that. There's actually a pretty significant bump here in the curb. You can see the car unsettled a bit, and I'm more likely to run a little wider on exit and use the curbing on the exit, which is safer. And so that's just kind of my recommendation. That's really what my goal is to do there as I'm coming in. There's going to be a very light brake, maybe about 10 to 20% brake as I reach the one board. There's going to be a downshift into fourth, and then very quickly getting back up to full throttle through the rest of the corner here. So let's go ahead and play that through its speed. All right, so approaching Riches. I'm sorry, not Riches, Wilson. My break point for this corner is in between the 1 and the 2, or actually where the orange marking is here on the guardrail. And it's going to be a real hard initial 80% or so brake at that point, and then bleeding off brakes pretty quickly from there to avoid lockup as the car slows and as you lose downforce with the reduction in speed there. You want to just kind of ease off as you get closer to turn in. Now for this particular corner, I kind of cheat inward toward the middle of the track. You really want to get your turning done in a short amount of time. You know, real nice tight turning radius. Down into first gear. You'll actually notice that I shift down into second and then first. not necessary to do that, but for rhythm and just to make sure that I'm not shifting down too early and risking blowing the engine. That's just a little bit safer. And it can also help with timing and rhythm. And so I'll go to second and then down into first once I get a little closer here to the corner here. Now this is a late apex. I'm trailing into the corner. You'll see brakes are still carried in all the way almost to the mid-corner point, and then maybe just very lightly dragging the brakes to kind of help with rotation a bit. And the apex that you're aiming for is really right about where you see this taller sausage curbing on the right. That's where you want your goal to be getting back on throttle. And as you reach that point, the amount of throttle you give is actually going to be really closer to about 30-ish, 30-40% or so. And as you start to kind of straighten out, unwind your steering, keeping the throttle under, at, or below 50% is a good idea. And then as you feel the car, the weight of the car, the balance of the car settle, and as you get straightened up, you can then go ahead and apply more throttle past that point as you've got that straightened up, and kind of aiming toward the left side of the road here to help get it straightened up sooner. And then reaching full throttle and shifting up into second gear soon after that. So let's go ahead and play this corner through. Back up just a bit more. All right, so approaching Palmer, I like to make sure that I'm all the way over to the right here. I actually ended up using just a little bit of the grass here as well. It's okay as long as you're off of that, just really filling out the limits of the racing surface there. But as long as you're off the grass there at the turn-in point, there will be just a very kind of a quick light brake, maybe 30% or so brake. And for me, I'm looking for late apex. I don't want to turn in too soon. I will use the curbing here on the left a bit, but not the earlier part. Like I say, it's a later apex, and so if you're coming up onto the curbing, for me, more likely I'm going to be coming up onto the latter part of the curbing as I'm getting onto throttle. I actually ran a little wide here in this particular instance, but was able to get back to full throttle at a good amount of time, and you can actually use all of the runoff here on the right-hand side without an off track. So there are actually a lot of areas on this track where you can use a lot of the runoff, and it's pretty forgiving as far as cut tracks and whatnot, or even 1Xs. So I'll try to point out some of the areas where you can get a cut track penalty or be careful of a 1X. But this is not one of those points. This is pretty loose as far as the limits go. All right, so here we come down now into Agostini. My break point is just, I guess, just after the 2, before you get to the 1. So kind of hard to spot maybe a specific spot other than, I guess there's kind of some speakers here over to the right that you could maybe use. But yeah, I think my goal is to get to threshold brake before reaching the 1 board. So it really is between the 2 and the 1. Again, a very hard braking zone. I actually probably got up a little over 80% in this particular case. But again, if you're braking hard, just make sure that you're easing off pretty quickly to avoid lockup. But you can really slow the car quickly in the early braking zone. And braking in a straight line, keeping the car here to the right and patient on turn-in. Still kind of modulating brakes a bit as I get ready for the turn-in point. Again, a later apex, so I'm looking to reach throttle. Can't really quite see it from here. Right at about this mark here, this latter part of the curbing. So as I kind of come in, I want to get nice and close to the curbing there, and that's the point where I can start to ease in on the throttle and open up steering. This is all second gear, by the way, so this corner is a downshift from 4th to 2nd, and then taking the whole corner all in second gear. The only corner that I use first gear in on this track is Wilson, that second turn. So I don't use first gear anywhere else, just second gear corners here. Let's go ahead and play this one through. All right, Hamilton. So coming into Hamilton, I'll keep the car up into third gear. And even though you'll kind of reach the point where you could briefly shift up into fourth with the gearing that I'm using, you can see the RPMs there up over 7,000. And 7,000, by the way, is typically my shift up point. And so, but this is a point where just as the car kind of reaches that point is about where I'm going to start to ease off. And it's really more of a throttle lift and maybe just a very light tapping of the brakes. And so you can see as I lift and turn in, as far as turn in point, maybe right at about where the structure here is, right as you reach that, or just before that. Very light tapping of the brakes to kind of help with rotation. And you can actually pass through this pylon on the left. You can actually the car can actually clip through that. You can't hit it, so you can't take any damage from that, but you can kind of cross through that, and there's no off track for that. So I like to use as much of that curbing, and even looks like crossing over that into the grass a bit to get through here with as much speed as I can. And of course, just as I've left the curbing, getting back to throttle, letting the car track all the way out. There's no off track for using, again, any of the surface here, this extended surface or reinforced surface here to the right. And that's going to be full throttle all the way off. So let's go ahead and play that through. So you're getting over to the left immediately, and as soon as you get the car positioned over to the left, you're already entering your braking zone for Augies. And so you'll see this just as I've kind of straightened out, and maybe even just before I've reached the left, and I'm still turning to get the car straightened up along the left-hand side, I've already started to brake. So this braking zone comes up pretty quickly. I think that the better that you get at taking Hamilton, the more speed you're going to be carrying through here, and the sooner this brake zone is going to come up and catch you off guard. And so late braking into Augies is something that I was finding myself doing pretty frequently until I could consistently take Hamilton at a good amount of speed, and then get the car positioned here into the braking zone. As you brake into Augies, you're actually not going to brake probably quite as hard. It's more like a 50% brake or so. Now, when I initially take this corner, I would come all the way out to the curbing, but I started taking more and more over the curbing here. But the danger with this line, you can actually, I think it's actually a little bit smoother line to come in a little bit more. I don't know exactly where the off track is, but there is an off track and a cut track penalty for getting up into the grass. And so you really don't want to take too much of this, but you'll notice as I come across the curbing here, in the latter part, it can unsettle the car just a bit as you kind of come up over the curbing back onto the to the asphalt there. So depending on the angle, it can actually be a little rougher than this. So it's actually better to take more than just a little. And if you're not going to come up over the curbing, just follow and just run a tire up along the red and white curbing, and it's going to be a little safer to do that. So there are several lines that I think it's pretty wide open as far as how you can come through on this corner here. And so I experimented with lines quite a bit through there to just kind of see what worked, what was smooth, and what was quick. And I think I'll just kind of typically straddle up over the red and white curbing in most cases now. There is also a cut track penalty for coming up any more than I have here on this on Hamilton as well. So just to point that out, you will get a cut track penalty once you reach the 1x mark. It I think is immediately a cut track penalty. So be careful of that. And same thing here. I think it was as soon as you come up into a 1x, I think it gives you a cut track penalty for that. So coming off this corner, try not to turn in too tight. Try not to follow the road to the right here too tightly. Open up your steering and just let the car straighten out and aim for the left-hand side of the road here. If you try to kind of follow the right-hand line here, then you can find yourself spinning in a hurry. And I find that just letting the car come out wide and using all of the road here will also help for the following corner. And so just using all of the road here into Williams can definitely be helpful. So that's really, I think, the better and quicker line anyway, to just let the car track out wide to the left there. So let's play this through at speed first. All right, so coming into Williams, the apex that I like to look for, I don't know if I can see it a little bit better here, is this this little patch of concrete, and that's where I'm aiming to get the car right up close to and back to throttle right at about that point. So you can see I've lifted on throttle, very light braking in third gear, very light brake and lift on throttle, turning in. You can see my tapping of the brake there, just to kind of help with rotation a little bit. And the goal is to just get as close to this little concrete patch here, and that's where I'm going to be getting back on throttle and just easing on that. The amount of throttle you can give here is to basically avoid running wide and getting an off track. You can use all of the surface up here, although I'm really more worried about running a little bit too wide here on the exit, and this is really more the risk of a 1X or kind of a bumpier exit coming any wider than that. So I don't typically run very wide in the initial part of the curbing. It's really just, my goal is based off of where I want to come off and exit the curbing without running too wide on the very end of that red and white curb. So let's play that at speed. All right, so coming down the Bentley straight toward Brundle. So Brundle's pretty tricky. This is one of the trickier portions of the track to get right. And I think that what helped me was just first finding a good consistent turn-in point, where I know that I could kind of get the car turned in consistently and angled into the braking zone. There's a few different braking zones in this, at least the way I treat it is a kind of a double braking zone. So I'm turning in just as I reach the one board here. And so keeping the car up to the right there, up to that point, and I can see I'm turning in just as I reach that. And just as I turn in, I'm actually going to brake and kind of straighten out a braking zone that kind of leads me toward the middle of the track here. So you'll see about a 65 or so brake, letting the car angle in and then lifting so that I can now kind of turn in and get as close to these pylons. And actually, again, you can clip through, pass through the pylons a bit here, which I do there. So I like to get up onto the red and white curbing and get the car over to the left here pretty tight. And now the rest of the braking that is done here is very light. It's really only maybe 30% braking. You really can't brake too hard. There's a bit of weight transfer going on here, and if you're carrying too much speed at this point and you have to brake harder than this, you're going to feel the car come around on you, and you're going to spin quite very quickly because of the weight transfer that's still happening as you come into the corner here. But you really want to get the car positioned over here to the left and slowed real gradually at this point. So keep it smooth, keep it gradual, and open up the corner so that as you get turned in, you can get as close to the tall curbing here on the right without hitting it, obviously, and getting back to throttle just as you cross that. That really should be your goal, is to be rolling on throttle just as you cross this apex here in the corner. So I'm coming on throttle there. I actually felt like I was maybe just a tad late there. Getting on throttle, you can let the car track out and use, again, this extra reinforced surface if you need to. But your goal should be getting back to full throttle just as you come up over this curbing here on the left. So let's go ahead and play that through at speed from the braking zone. Now you'll notice I shifted down twice. Again, not really necessary. For me, it's just part of the rhythm and timing. So I start in fourth gear, and actually fifth gear. I start in fifth gear and I shift down into third in the initial braking zone. So there's a turn in braking and downshift into third, turning again, braking lightly, downshift into second. And that just helps me with my timing and rhythm there. Again, you could just wait and downshift into second directly. If you're sequential shifting, then I think what you would do is probably downshift a couple times. You'd go from fifth to fourth to third, pause for a bit as you kind of get into your second braking zone, and then downshift into second just before you turn into the final apex there. All right, so coming into the bomb hole, the bomb hole. The bomb hole is it's an important corner, I think, to take quickly because you can carry a lot of speed through. You don't want to miss your apex. For me, I'm actually really aiming to get as close to the latter part of the curbing here as an apex, because I don't like to apex too soon, because I feel like if I come in on the curbing just a little too early, then I end up running wide on exit. And so I like to make sure that I'm coming in as tight as I can here toward the latter part of that curb, and that seems to get me set up for a better line and a better exit on the corner. Now, if you hit this just right, it's just a lift. You don't have to brake at all. Now, I think I do, in this case, tap the brakes, and let's see if I do. Yeah, just very lightly. I have my foot kind of resting on the brake pedal, and I'm ready to just kind of tap the brakes if I feel like I might be carrying just a bit too much speed or might need a little extra rotation there. But like I say, you can get through here with just a lift if you get the lift done at the right amount of time. So just as I'm turning in before the sign here, there's the lift, getting the car up as close to the right here. And I don't think do I ever fully come off throttle? No. So I'm never fully off throttle and then back on throttle just as I cross the apex there, and I'm sure that I can ease back to throttle without running too wide on the exit. This exit comes up pretty quickly. This exit curbing does. It's a bit of a bumpy exit curbing there, and you can see myself actually crossing over a little bit of a bumpy part there. So running a little wide there, but was able to keep the throttle down there without any trouble and maintain control of the car through that. So let's play that at speed. All right, so coming around the final corner here, really this is just about modulating throttle and keeping your speed up. You'll see that I never come off throttle. I don't brake at all until the latter part of the corner here, but giving the car throttle, kind of helping steer the car with the throttle, keeping the speed up, and it's probably beneficial to let the car run just a little bit wide in the mid part of the corner so that you can kind of come back in. The braking zone, again, similar to the example I talked about a minute ago in Brundle and Nelson, where you don't want to brake too hard with the weight transfer that's still happening. The car's not settled, and so you want to brake kind of early. This third pylon from the end is about where I start to brake. You can differentiate it from the others because they're leaning together, if that helps. So that's where I start to brake, but it's light braking because you really can't brake too hard here without sending the car into a spin. So think of it as kind of a trail braking in to the corner where you've got to brake a little earlier because you can't brake as hard, and then just kind of carry like a 30% brake or so around the last part of the corner. But you want to keep it tight to the right here, because as you come around the last part of the corner, you want to be able to turn in, hit your apex here on the left without hitting the taller curbing, and then get to throttle just as you cross that. And so you can see just as I'm coming across, could have got a little bit tighter there, getting on throttle right at that point. And then by the time you reach the curbing on the right, you're back to full throttle. Now, you can use all of this extra surface here to the right if you have to, but I find that if you hit this line just right with the right amount of speed, you really don't need it. And so it's really just kind of some extra space there that you can use if you have to without an off track. I did find that if I had kind of crossed over into this extra surface where the car was kind of more straddling the curbing here, that seemed a little slippery. It was a little harder to get back to full throttle as quickly without setting the car into a spin if you were too aggressive with the throttle. So if you do cross up over into this extra surface here, where you want to be back to full throttle pretty quickly at this point, You might have to delay throttle just a bit, just there for precautionary purposes and to avoid a spin. So let's play this through at speed. All right, so there's a lap of Snetterton 300. Hope you found it helpful, and I'll talk to you later.